Happy Halloween, everyone! Tonight we are watching Night of the Living Dead from 1968. I figured, as opposed to just doing a regular old review on the film, why not just release a full commentary track on the movie, just going over the entire film, really? Given the fact that it's actually copyright-free as it's in the public domain, which we'll definitely get into later. And it also just happens to be my all-time favorite horror movie. I feel that would be a lot more fun, I would say, as this is definitely one of those movies that should be watched in groups, I feel, especially around Halloween time. And obviously the first thing to note is the imposing scenery. We have with Cross there, and we have a great deal of dead trees in the distance. Very, very cozy in a lot of respects, actually. This was filmed just above Pittsburgh, actually, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a town called Evans City. Very modestly sized town, and certainly very intriguing opening sequence here. We don't know where they're going, we don't know who these people are, it's just a camera following a car. Very effective. Here we have a sign with bullet holes in it, which unfortunately is, well, yet unsurprisingly, is no longer there. And as you can imagine, so many people have visited these sites just above Pittsburgh. Here we have Evans City Cemetery, which has certainly become ground zero for horror fans. This film was shot in the summer of 1967, yet released on October 1st, 1968, and as you can imagine, has certainly become one of the most famous and iconic independent films of all time. And here we have two characters here, and I'll just let them talk.
They ought to make the day the time changes, the first day of summer.
What?
Well, it's 8 o'clock and it's still light.
A lot of good the extra daylight does us. Now, we've still got a 3-hour drive back. We're not going to be home until after midnight.
Well, if it really bugged you, Johnny, you wouldn't do it.
You think I want to blow Sunday on a scene like this? You know, I figure we're either going to have to move Mother out here or
wrong with
move
the
the
cemetery?
grave into Pittsburgh.
She can't make a trip like this.
Oh.
Bickering
Know that she
siblings.
can't. Is there any of that candy left?
No.
Look at this thing. We still remember. I don't. You know, I don't even remember what the man looks like.
Johnny, it takes you 5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes to put the wreath on the grave.
Johnny was actually portrayed by Russ Streiner, who was one of the producers of the film, which tells you a great deal about the budget and the limitations that they had and how they worked with what they had, really, being incredibly resourceful. Speaking of producers, that's actually Carl Hardman, who is probably the most significant producer of the film on the radio there. Again, being incredibly resourceful, and the overall atmosphere of this sequence and these scenes in the film is quite breathtaking and incredibly relaxing.
Which row is it in?
And this tilting shot here, tilting from the tree to Barbara and Johnny, it's very noir-like, and it's truly independent filmmaking at its finest, I would say. There's just something about this scene. There aren't any monsters yet, there isn't anything strange going on, it's just two people walking in a cemetery, and that's really all you need. Black and white, monochrome.
There's no one around.
Well, it's late. If you'd gotten up earlier.
Oh, look, I already lost an hour's sleep on the time change.
I think you complain just to hear yourself talk.
Judith O'Dea as Barbara, up-and-coming actress at the time, who actually moved to California, yet moved back to Pittsburgh upon hearing of word that this film was getting released, and she was so excited to the point that she just wanted to have everything to do with it.
I wonder what happened to the one from last year. Each year we spend good money on these things. We come out here and the one from last year's gone.
Well, the flowers die, and the caretaker or somebody takes them away.
Yeah, a little spit and polish. You can clean this up. Sell it next year. Wonder how many times we bought the same one.
Pretty interesting to think that all the people that were obviously buried here have become really immortalized by this film.
Hey, come on, Barb. Church was this morning, huh?
Here we have the first ever flesh-eating zombie in film history walking right there, which is quite something, very imposing. And that's the best way to introduce a new kind of creature. Instead of just having it rip apart a person, just show it just slowly and menacingly walking in the distance.
I haven't seen you in church lately.
Well, there's not much sense in my going to church. Do you remember one time when we were small, we were out here? It was from right over there. I jumped out at you from behind the tree, and Grandpa got all excited, and he shook his fist at me, and he said, "Boy, you'll be damned to hell." Remember that? Right over there. Well, you used to really be scared here.
Pretty much every sibling has done this to their other sibling, to be fair.
Stop it now, I mean it.
There's that famous line that has been recited.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it. You're ignorant.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
Stop it. You're
I actually remember watching the scene years before watching the actual film, and it always stuck with me. Why is he tormenting her? What is happening there?
Hear you.
Here he comes now. I'm getting
Very
out.
imposing
Johnny.
shot there.
Oh! No! No! Johnny! Help me!
Bill Heinzman actually played as the zombie here, and what's interesting is, with every single film project that he actually worked on after Night of the Living Dead, he always portrayed a zombie, and it was always that same style of makeup as well. So he was truly committed to his character. Ah, the sound effect was actually achieved by squashing fruit. If it weren't Bill Heinzman portraying that zombie, I don't think the impact of zombies in film as well as in culture would be as iconic. He just has that kind of strange sort of look, and we don't know why this person is attacking both Johnny and Barbara, and obviously, unlike other movies of this kind released perhaps in the 50s, even in the 40s, and even prior to this in the 60s, there would be whole kind of scenes of exposition, just, oh, this monster was reanimated due to a curse and is attacking people in the graveyard. But now we don't know why, with this film, we don't know why this kind of person is attacking them. Is he some kind of murderer? Did he lose control of his senses? It's just, we don't know. And that is definitely one of the, probably the strongest element of the film, actually, is how strong the mystery of the movie is. We don't know why the dead people are actually rising. And that is something you really don't see, you really haven't seen before this movie, and you really have never seen since. It's a mystery that's been lacking in the horror genre. And Bill Heinzman said that he actually got the walk subconsciously from Boris Karloff in the movie The Walking Dead from the mid-30s, which is very neat. Karloff, of course, portraying the Frankenstein's monster in the Universal movies. So the chase scene ensue here. You could argue this is certainly a bit hokey, but to be quite honest, I would say it actually helps the film in many respects. How it begins perhaps a little hokey, and then it transitions to just downright terrifying, which we'll definitely get to. That's one of the fun elements of the film as well. Constantly falling. Can't call it cliche here because it was still relatively new in the late 60s, but goodness has that been done to death. Pun unintended. Classic shot of Heinzman there. this scene, believe it or not, is actually my all-time favorite scene in the movie, funny enough. And it really is so simple. This is one of the best facets of horror, I would say, is that you really don't need much to make a film creepy or terrifying. All you really need is a woman walking in a farmhouse, very dimly lit scene, and the music and just how familiar it is. I remember growing up in very dimly lit houses such as this as I was watching the movie, and it really resonated with me how when you live in an area surrounded by trees, and when you're really far away, almost from civilization in some respects, it's almost as though you really are kind of in a world of horror, as anything can go wrong, and you're really perpetually surrounded by darkness and such. Very kind of solitary sort of scene here. Okay. Scoping out the farmhouse. Obviously getting incredibly tensed up. How really anything that's minute can actually terrify you. Intriguing performance there, Judith. Nothing like a telephone that doesn't work. The music was actually chosen from a library called Capitol High Q, and they only bought the music for a little over $1,000, and all non-original music from a library and such, and the music they chose for this film, I have to say, is superb. Even though it wasn't made for the movie per se. Just don't know what'll hit you when you watch the film. Especially for the first time, of course. Such as that. Corpse on the stairway. I mean, nothing wrong with that per se. Seems like something that you'll come across pretty much all the time. Especially these days. Here we have Dwayne Jones as Ben, who really is the protagonist of the film. And there's a lot to unpack here, obviously. Now,
it's all right.
For 1968, as you can imagine, casting a black person as the lead of a film, especially a horror movie and such, that was incredibly revolutionary. And interestingly enough, in the late 60s, naturally, you just really wouldn't see that. Obviously, prior, back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, usually the kind of black actor or actress would be kind of the butler or another sort of very minor character, yet here it's a protagonist, so naturally incredibly revolutionary. And the filmmakers, they didn't intend on casting a black person as Ben, given the fact that in the original script it was supposed to be a disgruntled truck driver and whatnot, yet he was only chosen not for his skin color, but because he was really the best actor that auditioned, and Romero, the director, really enjoyed that and had to revise the script to include him.
Jesus. We've got to get out of here. We have to get where there's some other people. Maybe we better take some food. I'll see if I can find some food.
It's a good idea. Stocking up on whatever supplies you can find and whatnot. Especially due to the mounting uncertainty and such. Very neat sequence there with the blood dripping down. Poor Barbara, she's already gone through so much. Truly such a shame. At least there is Ben, however.
What's happening?
Oh, you think what's happening?
What's happening?
One of the things to admire about these sort of, well, I can't really say zombies. Of course they are zombies, but in the film they're referred to as ghouls, is how intelligent they are.
There are two of them out there. Have you seen any more around here? I can
Of course creating a great deal of hysterics among the characters.
I don't know! What's happening?
Very intelligent. Something you really seldom see, actually. Of course. And interestingly enough, the zombies, as you can imagine, there were about 200 extras that were in the film. And they were all kind of townspeople and really just people that really had no acting aspirations, yet really wanted to have something to do with the project. You know, Ben saving the day, practically. Heinzman's probably somewhere else. Very effective zombie here. Or ghoul, I should say. Who... Returning back to Carl Hardman and Russ Streiner, the zombie that's stalking Barbara here is actually portrayed by John Russo, who wrote the screenplay alongside George Romero. So, they really had no shortage of people to use for these ghouls, if you will. Very neat little kind of battle here, showcasing some of the strength from the ghouls, really how powerful they are despite being dead. And again, we don't know why they return to life, which is very, very mysterious. Okay, got that job done. But, as is usually the case with everything in life, it's not quite simple. It's not that easy, really. Because what are you gonna do? Just batter and try to kill all of them? Multiplying like fleas, really. Parasites.
I know we're in here now.
Uh-oh. This scene always kind of confused me a little bit, I will say, though I suppose you can argue that his eyes are moving as a result of nerves.
Don't look at it.
For 1968, this was really, really hardcore stuff. There were definitely worse zombie movies before this. White Zombie, Revolt of the Zombies, both in the 1930s, but those films involved voodoo and kind of hypnotized zombies. This was completely different. Talk about originality. And these are probably arguably the best zombies because not only are they so intelligent, but they look so mundane and normal, and you really... It's pretty haunting, actually. Now it's just a matter of how to survive and how to board up the whole house, really. some of the great sort of strengths of the movie is these are all ordinary people. They all had day jobs. They were all living their lives, but then this, I suppose you can say, kind of a black swan event, an event that changes the entire world, yet no one saw coming, which of course we're now all very familiar with at the moment and such. And it's very real. It's very real. Just ransacking the whole farmhouse here. Nails and such. Really anything.
Why don't you see if you can find some wood, some board, something there by the fireplace, something we can...
Makes you ask the question to yourself, what would you do in this situation?
God damn... Look, I know you're afraid. I'm afraid too. But we have to try to board the house up together. Now, I'm going to board up the windows and the doors. Do you understand? We'll be all right here. We'll be all right here until someone comes to rescue us. But we'll have to work together. You'll have to help me. Now, I want you to go in and get some wood so I can board the place up. Do you understand? Okay? Okay?
This film's strengths really and truly lie within the realm of familiarity, you could argue, because this is just a regular old setting, just a farmhouse, and this can really be applied to any house in any neighborhood, really, whether it's suburban or rural. Just unlike the classic monster movies of the 30s and 40s that usually featured castles or Eastern European villages, this was a house, really. Something about that little scene there and how it shifts to more kind of serious music. It went from kind of a music box, a very kind of harmless and sweet sounding music box, to this very uncertain music and very creepy scene there. As a kid, apparently I hated those sort of kind of baby music box type melodies and such, which, who can blame me, really? Barbara finally being useful. Then again, who can blame her? She was thrust into hell, in the same way that future female characters in horror would certainly be thrust into, whether Sally from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, really any kind of survivor, final survivor from a slasher movie. Laurie Strode. Barbara really is kind of the archetype, in a sense. This is when woodworks and knowing how to use 2x4s and such really comes in handy. The music and the just overall general dynamic of the characters.
That's strong. Yeah, I want you to pick out some nails. Pick out the biggest ones you can find.
The synchronicity is quite staggering.
There, this room looks pretty secure. If we have to, we can run in here and board up the doors. Won't be long before those things be back pounding their way in here. They're afraid.
The early screenplay of the film, actually, or one of the many screenplays of the movie, was actually an alien invasion flick, and it involved kind of aliens just devouring human flesh, and I always thought that was a very intriguing plot, kind of combining 50s B-movie essence with more contemporary horror.
Anyhow, that's where I found
Makes you wonder if now we would have kind of flesh-eating sort of aliens as opposed to flesh-eating zombies, which would be quite something.
I jumped in to listen to it when a big gasoline truck came screaming right across the road. But there must have been 10, 15 of those things chasing after it, grabbing and holding on. Now, I didn't see them at first. I could just see that the truck was moving in a funny way. And those things were catching up to it. The truck went right across the road. Slammed on my brakes to keep from hitting it myself. It went right through the guardrail. I guess the driver must have cut off the road into that gas station by Beekman's Diner. It went right through the billboard, ripped over a gas pump, and never stopped moving. By now, it was like a moving bonfire. Didn't know if the truck was going to explode or what. Could still hear the man screaming. This thing is just backing away from it. I looked back at the diner to see if there was anyone there who could help me. It was when I noticed that the entire place had been encircled. There wasn't a sign of life left except by now there were no more screams. I realized that I was alone with 50 or 60 of those things just standing.
His backstory could make a good film.
Staring at me.
And as you can imagine, there has been a slew of comic books just
I started to drive. I
illustrating it.
just plowed right through them. They didn't move. They didn't run or just stood there staring at me. Just wanted to crush them. They scattered through the air like bugs.
Really tells you all you need to know about these ghouls here.
We were riding in the cemetery. Johnny and me. Johnny. We came to put a wreath on my father's grave. Johnny and he said, "Can I have some candy, Barbara?"
Well,
We didn't have any. And
this is a perfect demonstration of just how fuzzy
it's hot in here.
eyewitness testimony can really be. And how trauma can truly distort a story.
And he said, "Oh, it's late. Why did we start so late?" And I said, "Johnny, if you'd gotten up earlier, we wouldn't be late." Johnny asked me if I were afraid. And I said, "I'm not afraid, Johnny." And then this man started walking up the road. He came slowly, and Johnny kept teasing me and saying, "He's coming to get you, Barbara." And I laughed at him and said, "Johnny, stop."
Truly an immortalized phrase at this point.
Johnny ran away.
It's been that way since the film's release.
I went up to this man, and I was going to apologize.
Why don't you just keep calm?
And I looked up, and I said, "Good evening."
Well, we never heard that.
And he grabbed me. He grabbed me, and he ripped at me. He held me, and he ripped.
It's a shame that Judith O'Dea's performance as Barbara has kind of come under fire by many critics and such.
Johnny, help.
My response to those critics would be, well, how would you act? How would you react to something very similar? I actually think her performance was quite great.
Johnny came and he ran and he fought this man.
Again, very
I
real.
got so afraid. I ran. I ran. I ran. And Johnny didn't come. We have to wait for Johnny.
Any rational sibling would also want
We better go out and
to commit this course of action here and to
we have to go out and
try to
get
recover
Johnny.
their siblings. Really only,
Out there.
it's intrinsic.
Please, don't you hear me? We've got to go out and get
Problem
him.
is, it's much too late.
Please! We have got to go get Johnny! Please help me! Please!
Look, don't you know what's going on out there? This is no Sunday school picnic.
Don't you understand? My brother is alone!
Your brother is dead.
No! My brother is not dead! Oh.
On set, Ben was, or shall I say, Dwayne Jones, he was incredibly reluctant to actually practically punch Barbara here, given the fact that who knows what kind of response he would have gotten upon the film's release, but he went with it anyway, surely out of reluctance and such. But it's really a shame because Dwayne Jones, he actually, following the film's release, he actually shared a very cynical view of the movie, how it was, in a very notorious interview he went on about it in extensive detail, and he even claimed that he actually never saw any of the later Romero zombie movies, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, and he was just sick of the movie and being so sick of getting associated with it, and he was even typecast as well. When you search up Dwayne Jones online and such, all you see is kind of horror movies, I believe a zombie film or a vampire movie as well.
Are pooling their resources through an emergency network hookup to keep you informed of all developments. At this hour, we repeat, these are the facts as we know them. There is an epidemic of mass murder being committed by a virtual army.
Yet he focused extensively on his black theater in New York, which he was actually quite successful in, which is wonderful. And Romero, he didn't really want to include any sort of racial subtext into the script, as he thought that would have been, in his words, more hip for the 60s and such. Yet, following Dwayne Jones's passing, which was really just a few decades after the film's release, actually, he truly passed away before really everyone else who was involved in the movie. Romero really laments the fact that he actually wanted to be more quote-unquote hip, and he said that he should have listened to Dwayne and such to kind of play up more racial subtext, rather, to more or less kind of spur a sort of a message, but it was meant to happen the way it did.
Ambulances are literally deluged with calls for help. The scene can best be described as mayhem. Mayors of Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Miami, along with the governors of several eastern and midwestern states, have indicated the National Guard may be mobilized at any moment, but that has not happened as yet. The only advice our reporters have been able to get from official sources is for private citizens to stay in their homes behind locked doors. Do not venture outside for any reason until the nature of this crisis has been determined and until we can advise what course of action to take. Keep listening to radio and TV for any special instructions as this crisis develops further. Thousands of office and factory workers are being urged to stay at their places.
This fire sort of facet of the film, I think, is quite intriguing, because even if you watch the original Universal Frankenstein movies, it's always fire that Frankenstein's monster was always repelled by. And now, as Ben understood due to his backstory with Beekman's Diner and everything, these ghouls, or these things, if you'd like, are even repelled by fire, which is a horror trope that really has never went away. It's never receded. It's never died, if you will, to use apropos terminology in relation to the film.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received word that the president has called a meeting of his cabinet to deal with the sudden epidemic of murder which has seized the eastern third of this nation.
One of my favorite parts of the film, I have to say, is you don't really see a lot of horror. And on face value, that statement may sound a bit strange, but it's true. Yes, you do see kind of ghouls surrounding a farmhouse. Yes, you do see, just, especially in the opening scene, you do see kind of the ghouls attacking the characters. But most of the horror is actually allocated to
which we've just mentioned will include high-ranking scientists from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
ah, yes, a little bit of a zoom on the door there. Very foreboding yet again. But most of the horror is actually allocated and embedded within the radio broadcasting. You hear about people panicking, you hear about funeral homes and such, and how corpses are coming back to life. You don't see that. And that is definitely probably the reason why I love this film a great deal, and why so many others love the movie, is you don't see much of the horror, actually. What you do see, however, is just a group of people that are just holed up in a farmhouse trying to survive. And yet, on the radio, you hear about people on a highway just leaving their cars, running away from their cars, just out of panic. You hear...
Tell the people, for God's sake, to get off the streets. Tell them to go home and
there you
lock
go.
the doors and windows up tight. We don't know what kind of
Murder-happy characters. Very disturbing radio broadcasts. And
Carolina. So far, the only descriptions, the only clues anyone has of the killers come from frightened witnesses of some of the slayings. These eyewitness accounts variously describe the murderers as ordinary-looking people, misshapen monsters, people who look like they're in a trance, and things that look like people but act like animals. Some eyewitnesses tell of seeing victims who look as though they had been torn apart. This whole ghastly story began developing 2 days ago with the report of the slaying of a family of 7 in their rural home near Gulfport, Louisiana. Since then, reports of such senseless killings began snowballing in a reign of terror which has hot...
but that's really where much of the horror lies. It's very subtle. It's just, you hear about these families of, for instance, the family of 7 who were slayed by who knows what in their rural home and whatnot. You hear about so many cases on the radio here of people getting just devoured, of corpses just coming back to life and attacking the living. I mean, that is just terrifying. And it's quite brilliant because your imagination, of course, is powerful, and you can imagine these things occurring as you hear it on the radio, and in many ways, that's even more frightening than what you see in the actual film.
Some kind of national emergency. When first reports began filtering in, newsmen and law enforcement agencies were of the opinion...
This place is boarded up pretty solid now.
...in nature. However, as these
We ought to be all right here for a while.
dramatically, it was soon apparent that
We have
this
the
was
gun
something
and
more than the
bullets,
usual run of lawlessness.
food, and the radio.
Officials began to suspect an obscure kind of conspiracy.
Sooner or later, someone
Things as
bound to come and get us out.
creatures from outer space. So again, we join with law enforcement agencies, urging you to seek shelter in
Holding an 1894 Winchester there.
Hey, that's us. We're doing all right.
Thus far, they're following and abiding by the guidelines pretty well. Boarding up, not going outside.
Look, I don't know if you're hearing me, but I'm going upstairs now. If anything should try to break in here, I can hear it from up there. I'll be down to take care of it. Everything is all right for now. I'll be back to reinforce the windows and doors later. But you'll be all right for
Some people poke fun at the window there in the background, but
okay.
that's actually pretty high up from the foundation of the house. That's really the second floor, so really no need to board up that. This is just a stunning shot here. Very German expressionist-inspired. Films from the 1920s, such as Nosferatu and Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, undoubtedly inspired this. The music and the staircase and the stairway, it's very familiar and quite disturbing as well. We don't know why there's a corpse here, or why there's a body here with blood and such, which also adds a great deal of mystery to the film. Certainly one of the aspects of the movie that makes it very memorable is the mystery. Why is there a corpse on the staircase?
Consistent reports from witnesses to the effect that people who acted as though they were in a kind of trance were killing and eating their victims prompted authorities to examine the bodies of some of the victims. Medical authorities in Cumberland have concluded that in all cases, the killers are eating the flesh of the people they murdered. Repeating this latest bulletin just received moments ago from Cumberland, Maryland, Civil defense authorities have told newsmen that murder victims show evidence of having been partially devoured by their murderers. Medical examination of victims' bodies shows conclusively that the killers are eating the flesh of the people they kill. And so this incredible story,
Such an unforgettable
more ghastly with each report. It's difficult to imagine
just
such a thing actually
part of the
happening.
film there is the radio broadcasts,
We
and
have been receiving and passing on to you reports which have
the ante is constantly getting upped.
as is possible in this confused situation.
Oh,
It is happening, and it would appear that no one is safe from this wave of
there we go. Here we are introduced to the new characters in the film, which will lay the groundwork for the rest of the runtime, of course.
Hold it! Don't shoot! We're from town.
A radio.
Here you have Carl Hardman
Pennsylvania, the Butler County Sheriff has verified that reports of murder victims
on the radio in the beginning of the film.
being partially eaten by their slayers is true. No further details available at this time. However,
How long you guys been down there? I could use some help up here.
That's the cellar. It's the safest place.
You mean you didn't hear the racket we were making up here?
How were we supposed to know what was going on? Could have been those things for all we knew.
That girl was screaming. Sure, you must know what a girl screaming sounds like. Those things don't make any noise. Anybody would know somebody.
I have Keith Wayne.
Look, it's kind of hard to hear what's going on from down there.
We thought we could hear screams, but for all we knew, that could have meant those things were in the house afterward.
And you wouldn't come up and help.
Well, if there were more of
The
them.
racket sounded like the place was being ripped apart. How were we supposed to know what was going on?
Now, wait a minute. You just got finished saying you couldn't hear from down there. Now you say it sounded like the place was being ripped apart. It would be nice if you get your story straight, man.
All right, now you tell me. I'm not going to take that kind of a chance when we got a safe place. We luck into a safe place, and you're telling us we got to risk our lives just because somebody might...
Definitely one of the most debated topics in film.
All right, why don't we settle this?
Mister,
Who is more correct? Cooper, right there, who insists that they stay in the cellar, or Ben, who just wants to remain upstairs and just defend the farmhouse. Who is more correct?
you're insane. The cellar's the safest place.
I'm telling you, they can't get in here.
And I'm telling you, those things turned over our car. We were damn lucky to get away at all. Now you tell me those things can't get through this lousy pile of wood?
His wife and kids downstairs. The kid's hurt.
Well, I still think we're better off up here.
We could strengthen everything up, Mr. Cooper.
With all of us working, we could fix this place up in no time. We have everything we need up here.
We can take all that stuff downstairs with us. Man, you're really crazy, you know that? You got 1,000,000 windows up here. All these windows, you're gonna make them strong enough to keep these things out, huh?
I told you those things don't have any strength. I smashed 3 of them and pushed another one out the door.
Did you hear me when I told you they turned over our car?
Oh, hell, any good 5 men can do that.
That's my point. Only there's not going to be 5 or even 10. There's going to be 20, 30, maybe 100 of those things. And as soon as they know we're here, this place is going to be crawling with them.
Well, if there are that many, they'll probably get us wherever we are.
Going back to what you would do in this situation, it's just, who would you side with? Would you side with Cooper and remain in the cellar, try to basically just hunker down there as if it's a bunker, really? Or would you abide by Ben and remain upstairs and keeping guard of each and every window?
Place to run to. I mean, if they did get in, there'd be no back exit. We'd be done for.
The film really plays with your emotions
And we got windows
and sensibilities.
outside. But down there with no windows,
Everything just feels very real.
Tom, we wouldn't even know it.
But the cellar is the strongest place.
The cellar's a death trap.
I don't know, Mr. Cooper. I think he's right. You know how many's out there?
I don't know. Maybe 6 or 7.
Look, you two can do whatever you like. I'm going back down to the cellar, and you better decide. Because I'm going to board up that door, and I'm not going to unlock it again no matter what happens.
Now, wait a minute, Mr. Cooper.
No, I'm not going to wait. I've made my decision, now you make yours.
Now, wait a minute. Let's think about this. We can make it to the cellar if we have to. And if we do decide...
Keith Wayne, who portrays as Tom, the young man here, he was viewed by Romero as kind of a show business sort of guy who would really break into the industry, but unfortunately he actually ended his own life in the 1990s, and he worked as a kind of a chiropractor.
Yeah, it looks like about 8 or 10 out there now.
Though his performance, I would say, is quite something. He really does kind of fit that sort of 60s sort of young guy, if you will. Kind of the stereotypical 60s sort of young guy. Very iconic imagery here. Kind of the ghoul's hands getting crushed and kind of really bleeding through the windows. Really kind of questioning the notion of remaining upstairs and kind of giving a little bit of credibility to what Cooper wants to do, which is just remain downstairs in the cellar. And of course we have squibs that are used here, which are really neat special effects, sort of kind of explosions, how actors are kind of equipped with these sort of little explosives that when they detonate, fake blood just gets ushered all over their outfits and whatnot. Still, it's not a way to kill a zombie. It's not especially not a Romero zombie. You have to aim for a certain part. There you go. Right in the head. Very iconic image here. Perhaps the most iconic in the film. They even went as far as to have a nude model also be in the film as well. Which lends more realism, I would say, to the movie. Again, something you obviously wouldn't see in horror films, really any movie at that time. Unless we're talking kind of Western European, sort of French and Italian productions. Yet, how many members of the American audience really watch those films? Yes, that's an actual bug that actress, who we'll get to later on, consumed. Talk about realism. Dwayne Jones' acting is stunning, really. But then again, so is Hardman's. Even though Carl Hardman later said in an interview that he hated his acting in the film, which is understandable, but nothing to dwell on, though.
Part of what I'm fighting for. Now, if you're going down the cellar, get.
The man's insane. He's insane. We've got to have food down there. We've got a right.
This your house.
We've got a right.
You going down there with him?
Well,
Yes or no? This is your last chance. No beating around the bush.
Listen, I got a kid down there. She can't plus. I couldn't
That complicates matters significantly.
take all the racket and those things smashing through the windows.
Well, you're her father. If you're stupid enough to go die in that trap, that's your business. However, I am.
It's amusing how they never came to some sort of kind of compromise. Just, okay, you stay in the cellar, I stay upstairs. But just the dynamics of humanity really intervened and such. And as you can see, there's frustration mounting. Yep.
Bastards. You know, I won't open this door again. I mean it.
Mr. Cooper, with your help, we could...
With my help.
Let him go, man.
There you go.
Mind is made up. Just let him go.
But no.
Wait a minute. Judy, come on up here, honey.
Here we have Judith Ridley, who portrays as Judy and such, and
You're gonna let them get hurt too, huh?
It's all right, honey. Go ahead.
as far as I know, initially throughout the 80s and 90s and such, she was actually reluctant to appear in any kind of Night of the Living Dead reunions, but later she's kind of been the spokeswoman of the movie.
If we stick together, man, we can fix it up real good. There's lots of places we can run to up here. Mr. Cooper?
Her performance is a little stoic, but it's excusable, I would say.
Hey. Hey, kid.
One intriguing note to discuss is Night of the Living Dead was actually not the original title of the movie. The original title, George Romero wanted it to be Night of Anubis, and if you're aware of Egyptian mythology, Anubis was the god of the dead, but fearing that nobody would understand the reference, it was changed to Night of the Flesh Eaters, but there was another movie called Flesh Eaters, so they couldn't do that. And now we have Night of the Living Dead and such.
Two other people upstairs. A man and a girl. Yeah, but I didn't know who they
This is actually the real-life husband and wife of Carl Hardman and Marilyn Eastman here. And Marilyn Eastman was also in charge of the costuming and makeup as well. And that's Kyra Shawn, their real daughter, actually. So really a whole family here, basically. It's very sweet. We have two of the producers and their daughter.
All right.
I don't know what it is. She feels warm. Maybe it's shock.
Where'd you get the bandage?
Some...
Kyra Shawn is fortunately very hurt and such. And naturally they're very concerned. And you really can't blame Cooper for acting so erratic, given the fact that he really just, he wants the best for his daughter, he wants the best for his wife, and really for himself. He's not acting out of self-interest as much as he's acting out of just protecting his family.
We'll see who's right. We'll see when they come begging me to let them in down here.
That's important, isn't it?
What?
To be right, everybody else to be wrong.
What do you mean by that?
Does anyone up there know why we're being attacked?
Whatever it isn't just happening here. It's some kind of mass murder. It's going on everywhere. The radio said to stay inside.
Radio?
Radio upstairs. I heard a news bulletin.
There's a radio upstairs and you boarded us in down here?
I know what I'm doing.
What did it say?
Nothing. Nothing. They don't know anything yet. There's mass murder everywhere, and people are supposed to look for a safe place to hide.
Take the boards off that door.
We are staying down here, Helen.
Harry, that radio is at least some kind of communication. If the authorities know what's happening, well, they'll send people for us so they tell us what to do. How are we going to know what's going on?
Now Hardman is in a bit of a predicament here. Obviously portraying Mr. Cooper.
We may not enjoy living together.
You could say he's the antagonist of the film, but he's not evil. It's very complex.
Mr. Cooper, Ben found a television set upstairs.
Let's go.
Here's the infamous jump cut.
If Judy would come downstairs,
That's because much of the film was actually cut. About 10 minutes of the movie was actually cut, and it was lost for quite a while. And until it was actually uncovered and such for the recent Criterion Collection release, and they actually restored the movie in 4K. And I always said the movie looks great in 4K, but it's not as creepy as watching it in kind of poorer quality and whatnot, I would say. I'd much rather watch this movie on a VHS tape than 4K, because it just looks more creepy. The ghouls' faces are more distorted. It's more authentic, if that makes sense.
I'll take good care of her, Helen. She's all I have. Why don't you go upstairs now?
Feel very sorry for Helen. Really for everybody. The grand scheme of things. And Kyra Shawn, actually, the daughter, she was a huge horror fan, a huge horror junkie, actually. And when she had heard from her parents that she'd be in a horror movie, and that she'd actually have more or less a significant role and such, she was incredibly excited, as you can imagine. Not everyone can become a part of what they're a fan of, especially in that fashion.
Hey, give me a hand with this thing.
I gotta go help Ben with the television.
Nice shot there. How can you begin a conversation? Barbara sucking on a doily there. I guess in her case, certainly a natural reaction.
Don't be afraid of me. I'm Helen Cooper, Harry's wife.
This place is ridiculous. Look at this. There's a million weak spots up here.
Almost kind of comic relief sort of
Give
frustration
me one of those.
in some respect, which is enjoyable.
Her brother was killed.
And they talk about these windows. I can't see a damn thing. There could be 15 million of those things out there. That's how much good these windows are.
Why don't you do something to help somebody?
Here I have it. Drag a couple of those chairs together.
There's a socket over here.
You better watch this and try to understand what's going on. don't want anyone's life on my hands.
Is there anything I can do to
I don't want to hear any more from you, mister. If you stay up here, you take orders from me. And that includes leaving the girl alone.
It's on, it's on.
There's no sound. Play with the rabbit ears.
Reports, incredible as they seem, are not the results of mass hysteria.
Mass hysteria. What do they think? We're imagining all this? Shut up!
In all parts of the
Thank you, Ben.
wave of murder which is sweeping the eastern third of the nation is being committed by creatures who feast upon the flesh of their victims. First eyewitness accounts of this grisly development came from people who were understandably frightened and almost incoherent. Officials and newsmen at first discounted those eyewitness descriptions as being beyond belief. However, the reports persisted, and medical examinations of some of the victims bore out the fact that they had been partially devoured. I think we have some late word just arriving.
The biggest mistake in a horror movie.
Interrupt to bring this to you.
Never be skeptical of something that seems otherworldly and strange.
Report from National Civil Defense Headquarters in Washington. It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder. A widespread investigation of reports from funeral homes, morgues, and hospitals has concluded that the unburied dead are coming back to life and seeking human victims. It's hard for us here to believe what we're reporting to you, but it does seem to be a fact. When this emergency first began, radio and television was advising people to stay inside, behind locked doors for safety. Well, that situation has now changed, and we're able to report a definite course of action for you. Civil defense machinery has been organized to provide rescue stations with food, shelter, medical treatment, and protection by armed National Guardsmen. Stay tuned to the broadcasting stations in
These
your
are all real names of towns.
This list of rescue stations. This list will be repeated throughout our
All across
news coverage.
Pennsylvania.
Look for the name of the rescue station
Western Pennsylvania.
nearest you and make your way to that location as soon as possible.
So we have that truck. If we can get some gas, we can get out of here.
There's a pump out by the shed.
I know, that's why I pulled in here, but it's locked.
Called this afternoon by the president. Since convening this conference of the presidential cabinet, the FBI, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the CIA has not produced any public information. Why are space experts being consulted about an earthbound emergency? So far, all the betting on the answer to that question centers on the recent Explorer satellite shot to Venus. That satellite, you'll recall, started back to Earth, but never got here. That's the space vehicle which orbited Venus and then was purposely destroyed by NASA when scientists discovered it was carrying a mysterious high-level radiation with it. Could that radiation be somehow responsible for...
That is the theory that most fans of the movie kind of adhere to and subscribe to, is
Washington has posed
it was the Venus probe that
How are you going to get over to that pump? Look.
was contaminated by some sort of radiation, and upon the US government blowing it up, and there's actually George Romero there on the far left right there, which I always thought was rather amusing.
Enough to cause these mutations. There was a very high degree of radiation. Well, just a minute.
And basically the Venus probe, which of course orbited Venus, was shot down by the US government, and the remnants of that craft was scattered throughout the country, and wherever those remnants landed, that's where the dead rose, in essence. That's where all the bodies were reanimated. But the filmmakers still, to this day, attest that even though that is a possibility, we don't know why the dead are rising. Washington, D.C. here. The Capitol building.
I thought we decided that is not proved yet. Was the satellite, when the satellite was exploded?
Unusual amount of radiation, enough to cause mutation under certain circumstances.
Could have happened.
Have a bearing on it.
It does seem to have a bearing.
Will there be a reply for this?
Tapping into political horror, perhaps.
Later this afternoon. There will be a report this afternoon. Perhaps there will be a report. A later report. Will you close the window?
We are doing everything.
Government cover-up, perhaps. Well, good luck with that. Especially when tens of thousands of people are impacted.
Explanation of this.
We've heard all we need to know. We have to try to get out of here.
He said the rescue stations have doctors and medical supplies. If we could get Kenner in there, we could get help for her.
Is one of the world's foremost authorities on space science and technology.
Willard, I saw a sign that said Willard.
It's only about 17 miles from here.
You know,
It truly is quite wholesome in many respects, how all these people really knew each other, and they just decided to make a movie.
Reports about this. So we knew the old house was here, and we came in and found the lady upstairs dead. Then these other people came. We went down into the basement and put a bar across the door, and it is pretty strong.
How could we possibly get away from here? We've got a sick child, 2 women, 1 woman out of her head, 3 men, and the place is surrounded with these things.
For NASA. Dr. Grimes, your entire staff, I know, has been working.
This story always just stuck out to me, in particular, I would say.
Have any answers at this time?
Yes, we have some answers. But first, let me stress the importance of seeking medical attention for anyone who's been injured in any way. We don't know yet what complications might result from such injuries.
how bad has your kid been hurt?
Good advice, Doctor. Now, how about the basic
Look, you go down there and tell Judy. Yeah, you tell Judy to come up here.
Part of the suspense truly is the status of the child. Here we go.
In the cold room at the university, we had a cadaver from which all 4 limbs had been amputated. Sometime early this morning, it opened its eyes and began to move its trunk. It was dead.
There's something about that, when you imagine it in your head, just wow, that is terrifying. And John Russo, of course, the screenwriter, aside from George Romero, he actually...
Baby.
That's Kyra Shawn there. John Russo, he was actually involved with Return of the Living Dead from 1985, which isn't a sequel to this movie per se, but it does borrow many elements, and Night of the Living Dead was even referenced in the beginning of the film, and you actually see a kind of zombie in that movie with all 4 of its limbs amputated and reanimating. So, John Russo, he worked with that sort of idea and imagery later on in his career.
These must be carried to the street and burned. They must be burned immediately. Soak them with gasoline and burn them. The bereaved will have to forego the dubious comforts that a funeral service will give. They're just dead flesh and dangerous.
I see.
Judy, I need you to find some bedspreads or sheets to tear up into small strips, okay? Is there a fruit cellar here?
Yes.
We need some bottles or jars. Make Molotov cocktails and hold them off while we try to escape.
Hey, there's a big can of kerosene down there.
I'll see what I can find.
I'll look for the bottles.
There's a big key ring down there.
Finally, everyone is working together, or at least it appears that way.
I'll check.
We can toss the cocktails from a window upstairs. Meantime, a couple of us can go out and try to get the gas and come back for the rest of the people.
But that'll leave a door open someplace.
Yeah, that's right. It better be this door. It's closer to the truck. Before we go out, we'll put some supplies behind the cellar door. While we're gone, the rest of you can hold up in there.
I found some fruit jars in the cellar. And there's a key on here that's labeled for the gas pump out back.
I'm not really that used to the truck. I found it abandoned.
I can handle the truck, no sweat.
Provides the audience some comfort that they're finally working together, which is what they should have been doing in the beginning.
We'll put whatever lumber we find behind the cellar door. You can go upstairs and toss the cocktails from a window. Tom, you and I will have to unboard this door. After you toss the cocktails, you hustle back down here and lock this door. It's no good to board it up because we'll have to get back in quickly. After we get the gas and get back into the house, then we'll worry about getting everybody into the truck. Now let's move it.
No place to flee for safety, except to the rescue stations which have been set up. Indications are that before this emergency is over, we will need many, many more such rescue stations.
Very tender moment here between Judy, Tom.
You always have a smile for me. How can you smile?
Almost playing into the kind of romantic films of the time, kind of all those teenage movies. You see many tropes, kind of all congealed in one.
We gotta move.
Tom, are you sure about the phone?
The phone is dead out.
It's really hard to watch knowing the true fate of Heath Wayne here.
So worried about us.
Everything will be all right. As soon as
Even in interviews years after the film was released, he seemed very kind of melancholy and such.
I know.
Here you have Judith Ridley.
Tom. Are you sure we're doing the right thing, Tom?
What, about getting out of here?
Yeah.
Well, the television said that's the right thing to do. We've got to get to a rescue station.
I don't know.
Come on, honey, you're starting to sound like Mr. Cooper now.
But why do you have to go out there?
Look, I know how to handle that truck, and I can handle the pump. Ben doesn't know anything about that stuff.
But we're safe in here.
For how long, honey? We're safe now. But there's going to be more and more of those things.
I know all that.
Hey, listen. Remember when we had the big flood? Remember how difficult it was for us to convince you that it was right to leave? Remember we had to go to Willard then? This isn't a passing thing, honey. It's not like just a wind passing through.
It's enjoyable how the characters provide their own sort of bits of exposition, and it all comes together like a puzzle, that is superb and superlative storytelling. It all comes gradually, and it always sort of catches the attention of the audience.
Boy, you're sure no use at all, are you? We've got work to do, honey.
Something very innocent about the couples from back then as well, though that's an entirely different discussion. But, again, very tender moment. Yet, who knows what will happen here and in the future.
We better get her downstairs.
We have to go downstairs now, Barbara.
She's right. You have to go downstairs now, just for a little while, until we get back. Then we can all leave.
Well, there's a key word, I suppose. Finally making her compliant. Probably harder than boarding up the house and evading the ghouls as well. Even after multiple viewings, it's always refreshing and really kind of relieving seeing everyone work together in the way that they did. Or in the way that they are. How cordial everything is. And how there's that kind of sneaky feeling that everything will hopefully go well. Cooper obviously in charge of the Molotov cocktails here. Seems like a pretty decent strategy. They look very real, don't they? Now it's all exaggerated and a little over the top at times, but it's been that way since, you could say, the late 70s, early 80s, with regard to zombies. The classic fire bad trope. It is effective. So far so good. Very unnerving, claustrophobic kind of shots here.
I'm going with him.
Get back in the cellar.
I'm going.
It's too late. It's too late.
And of course, she just had to run out of the house.
Well, is it coming? Come on. Get in.
Again, making matters significantly more complex. See more uses of squibs there. Obviously, Cooper just trying to... now beginning to act out of self-interest. It's one way to get audiences to hate you. One interesting thing to note as well is the blood in the film was actually Bosco's chocolate syrup, because obviously because it's shot in black and white, they could really get away with utilizing kind of chocolate syrup for blood. They really didn't need anything excessive, anything red. Certainly something you can get away with. Using a real round on a gas pump, yes. Brilliant. Up. Now the plan is naturally going south.
Gotta get away from the pump! Hang on! Tom! Turn your cars and get out of the truck!
They only got so far, but ultimately... One key thing that people seem to forget in life, as well as in general, I would say, is you really can't outrun death. And... oftentimes it just... strikes when you least suspect it. One of the core inevitabilities of life. Now they are completely done. Again, making you wonder how you would certainly get out of this situation. More usage of squibs there. Just always fun. At least it still has a torch. Does come in handy. Again, all you really need, just blacked out eyes. Something very so mundane and therefore exponentially petrifying and frightening about the ghouls, and you even see them kind of sort of run. Or at least sort of speed walk. Which also makes them more frightening.
Cooper! Cooper!
Things are just getting worse and worse. Cooper is still trying to salvage Ben's sensibilities here, which, of course he can try, but obviously good luck, because that's practically betrayal. Truly acting out of self-interest here, Cooper. And they actually became best friends in real life, and following Dwayne Jones's passing, Hardman in interviews, you actually see him choke up and cry, because naturally Hardman was very, very much disgruntled with how he was treated, Dwayne Jones, in real life, and always referred to Jones as a wonderful human being and such, which makes this fight scene all the more enjoyable. Of course.
I dragged you out there and feed you those things.
Curious to note that the film is certainly a lot less younger than many of the music cues, and here we have a very, very classic and incredibly gruesome scene. The scene that truly made the film get in trouble. The first ever scene in which we see zombies just devour corpses. And naturally, the MPAA increased the R and X rating to really from 16 to 17 in 1970, just 2 years after this film was released, and you could argue that Night of the Living Dead truly kind of invented the R rating in a lot of ways. It truly made films, of course, naturally as the final classic horror movie, you could very well state that this really is the best middle ground horror movie, how it's not quite a sort of kind of grudgy, sort of incredibly strange and violent and bloody horror film that we saw in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even today. But it's also not quite a classic horror movie because of the prevalence of gore, and which were actually hoagie sandwiches that were covered in Bosco's chocolate syrup, which really gave Marilyn Eastman, there she is, really gave her a very, very easy time, I would say, because they didn't even need makeup after eating those kind of chocolate syrup-covered subs, if you will, or sandwiches. They looked sick already, which, who wouldn't?
10 minutes.
Oh, only 10 more minutes? We don't have very long to wait. We can leave. Oh, we better leave soon.
Interestingly enough, actually, Roger Ebert, who's arguably the most famous film critic of all time, actually, with his show Siskel and Ebert, he actually wrote a really neat and almost kind of infamous sort of film review of this movie, going on about how children were admitted to see the film and such, and how they were downright terrified of this film, which is quite something to read all these years later.
It's pretty far away. Seems like we ran.
Forget it. It's at least a mile.
Johnny has the keys.
You're gonna carry that child a mile through that army of things out there?
I can carry the kid. What's wrong with her? How'd she get hurt?
One of those things grabbed her.
Bit her on the arm.
Not good.
What's wrong?
Who knows what kind of disease those things carry? Is she conscious?
Barely.
She can't walk. She's too weak.
Well, one of us could try to get to the car.
You gonna turn it over by yourself?
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.
You have a car? Where? Where is it?
You won't be able to start it.
Yeah, I know. But where is it?
This is when the film becomes all the more ominous.
Good Lord.
Being monitored closely by scientists at all the radiation detection stations. At this hour, they report the level of the mysterious radiation continues to increase steadily. So long as this situation remains, government spokesmen warn that dead bodies will continue to be transformed into the flesh-eating ghouls. All persons who die during this crisis, from whatever cause, will come back to life to seek human victims unless their bodies are first disposed of by cremation. Our news cameras have just returned from...
The news broadcast is everything, to be quite honest.
This one conducted by Sheriff Conan McClellan in Butler County, Pennsylvania.
This is where it becomes a bit interesting, because obviously you see a bunch of these people with guns, kind of the classic sort of redneck stereotype with shotguns and whatnot, and it really is sort of the more contemporary and modern version of the angry kind of pitchfork-carrying, torch-wielding villagers that were chasing Frankenstein's monster. But really, if this were to happen today, you would see people kind of exercising their constitutional rights, if you will, and just whipping out different guns and utilize them against an undead horde, if you will.
Thing all the way in the fire. We don't want it getting up again.
Chief McClellan, how's everything going?
Oh, things aren't going too bad. Men are taking...
The reporter is actually played by Bill Cardell, who was a local horror movie host, actually. Think Elvira and Vampira especially, and Zachary and Svengoolie. There we have George Costanza playing as the chief.
Beat him off, blasted him down. Yeah, okay.
Chief, if I were surrounded by 6 or 8 of these things, would I stand a chance with them?
Well, there's no problem. If you had a gun, shoot him in the head. That's a sure way to kill him. If you don't, get yourself a club or a torch. Beat him or burn him. They go up pretty easy.
Well, Chief McClellan, how long do you think it will take you until you get the situation under control?
Well, that's pretty hard to say. We don't know how many of them there are. We know when we find them, we can kill them.
Are they slow-moving, Chief?
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
Well, in time...
They're dead, they're all messed up.
It's up in 24 hours?
Well, we don't really know. We know we'll be into it most of the night, probably into the early morning. We're working...
You have a gun, shoot it in the head. There you go. Really is the most common way to kill a zombie in fiction and such.
Chief McClellan, this is Bill Cardill, WIC TV 11 News.
Thank you, Bill, for that report. Official spokesman declined to speculate.
So at least there's hope. There are people that are on the move and eradicating all the undead hordes and such. Yet the power went out, so...
Is the fuse box in the cellar?
I don't know. It isn't the fuse. The power lines are down. Helen, I have to get that gun.
Haven't you had enough?
Look, 2 people are dead already on account of that guy. Take a look out that window.
Reverting back to the intelligence of the ghouls. They really are quite intelligent. It was a great idea to include sort of the granting of a mind and almost a conscience to these dead sort of creatures of the night here. Which does make sense, because obviously they were people prior, and you'd think they would retain at least some semblance of their former lives, which you would see in later zombie films such as Dawn of the Dead, in which zombies are overtaking a shopping mall. Which makes sense, given the fact that that's where they spend a great deal of their time. Now the situation is looking more and more desperate. Would be interesting to see how many people would still want to remain upstairs even after seeing this. Cooper is truly driven by this kind of primal sort of instinct to, yes, defend his family, but also, I suppose, to take control as well, which does tell you all you really need to know about being power hungry. That's where this film becomes almost a psychological study, seeing who is more correct, Cooper or Ben, and what would you do, and how would people react and respond to such a situation in real life? Than just losing control outright. Again, you really can't blame him. But then again, was he correct? That's a whole debate altogether. Or was it best for everyone to just head down the cellar, which granted would have certainly deprived us of a movie, but... naturally, in terms of real life at least, that's what most... out of rationality, perhaps, that's what most people would have done. But what's the fun in not seeing all the zombies? I mean, unless you were mortified, of course. You have father and daughter. Not the most idyllic bonding you've ever seen, but... here we have Barbara finally putting herself together. Again, being the archetype of the future kind of survivor sort of females in horror. And here we have Karen, obviously portrayed by Kyra Shawn, just very grimly. This is probably the most disturbing, actually. Just quality of the film. These shots in particular, just with the trowel. Very grueling case of matricide, certainly. And as you can imagine how audiences reacted in the late 1960s, of course it really wasn't pretty. Definitely one of the final hits of the drive-in as well, the drive-in movie theater. Yet everybody was just overtaken by these undead armies from who knows what. Was it the satellite? Was it some sort of curse? Was it just divine intervention? And there's Johnny. And cemetery and funeral wear, which is heavily appropriate. Speaking of the cemetery, a massive storm, according to John Russo, actually uprooted many of the corpses in Evans City Cemetery, which is incredibly ironic. To think that in the exact same locations in which Night of the Living Dead was filmed, there were actually corpses scattered all over the place at one point, due to a storm. Here we have Bill Heinzman. Talk about influential. The first child zombie as well. What a performance. So many of the imagery, in terms of so many of the production stills regarding the film, really were pictures of her kind of standing in the cemetery, looking very frighteningly in the camera. Once again, you can't outrun death. Certainly one of the metaphors you could make in relation to the film. You just cannot outrun death. You cannot outpace it. It is the great inevitability. Really ironic how Ben just resorts to remaining in the cellar, given the fact that he was so adamantly opposed to doing such. So you could make the argument that overall, generally speaking, as much as you'd love to really hate Cooper, as much as you'd like to hate him, Cooper was correct. He was certainly correct, you could argue. Certainly is a very sophisticated sort of issue, however. Of Cooper there. Very iconic shot there. Indiscriminately just showering him with bullets. Something, if you're a Ben proponent, certainly something you could say he should have done a very long time ago. Though if he missed the head, then that would have caused issues. For 1968, that was massively risque. In fact, probably more than risque, to see, in essence, the daughter really devouring the father, really just kind of eating and consuming the arm of the father. This film certainly laid the groundwork for the many horror movies of the 70s and 80s. You have The Exorcist, you have A Bay of Blood, Don't Torture a Duckling, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Really, all those films truly owe a great deal to Night of the Living Dead. Every single horror movie, you could argue, released after Night of the Living Dead really took something from it. Here we have very tranquil sort of shots of the field. And unfortunately, that the farmhouse was actually, it was loaned by someone to the cast and crew for a relatively cheap price, given the fact that the farmhouse was actually going to be demolished anyway. Yet you can still visit the site, and here we have all the local townsfolk that we saw in the news report. This music can also be heard in movies such as Teenagers from Outer Space as well, and other public domain films. If you're a Ren and Stimpy fan, then you'd be well aware of how the soundtrack for that show, for instance, was actually all just library music. Here we have all the dogs and such.
Hey, Vince, Al, you want to get about 4 or 5 men and a couple dogs? There's a house over here behind those trees. We want to go check it out. You still here, Bill?
Yeah, Chief, we're going to stay with it till we meet up with the National Guard.
Where'd you get the coffee?
One of the volunteers, you're doing all the work, you take it.
Thank you. We should be wrapped up here about 3 or 4 more hours. We'll probably get into Willard then. I guess you can go over there and meet the National Guard. Nick, you interested?
Going town to town, clearing out everything.
Tell Dom to check in the office, see what's happening.
All right, Steve, tell him we're going to stay with it, and everything appears to be under control.
One of the rare instances in film, really, in horror, where, especially in more or less kind of post-apocalyptic sort of films, humanity wins, really. That is the generally accepted sort of assessment from this film that you can take, is humanity wins. It prevails, yet we saw so much horror unfold. It really doesn't matter if humanity wins at this point. Endless, endless, endless headshots.
They need you down there by the barn. Some of these guys can follow the wagon down. I only need a few men to check out the house. Somebody had a cookout here, Vince.
Yeah, sure looks like it, Cop.
Gotta love that line. Somebody's got to cook out here, Vince. Well, not too inaccurate, actually.
Get up here. Nick, Tony, Steve, you want to get out in that field and build me a bonfire? You, drag that out of here and throw it on the fire.
Nothing down here.
All right, go ahead down and give him a hand. Let's go check out the house.
There's something there. I heard a noise.
All right, Vince, hit him in the head, right between the eyes. Good shot. Okay, he's dead. Let's go get him.
Now, this ending is perhaps the ultimate existentialist and even nihilistic ending. It's something that feels so hopeless, and Romero was actually given the opportunity to change the ending and make it more of a love story somehow, which really wouldn't make much sense. Yet he actually refused, which is incredibly admirable, and naturally a great deal of debate has been spawned by the ending as well, how really they thought that Ben was a ghoul and such, yet you could certainly argue that there was definitely another reason why, but still, regardless of what you take from the ending, it really is a huge slap in the face, and that is why this film, or perhaps one of the reasons why this film is so immortalized and so iconic. And you just don't expect it at all. You'd think that Ben would at least be the final survivor, but the fact that you spent the entire movie trying to warm up to these characters and trying to root for these characters, taking sides, whether it be Cooper or Ben, yet nobody survives. It's just, it is the ultimate just existentialist ending in horror. And a very macabre way to truly finish off classic horror as well, making it feel more real. paving the groundwork for future horror movies that were much more bloody, much more violent and gory. Well, that's my commentary on 1968's Night of the Living Dead, directed by George Romero. Now, I hope you found that informative, and I hope the rest of your Halloween goes so very swell. Thanks for watching.